No buys and low buys have taken the world by storm this year, but what if I told you that 90% of everything you think you know about the no buy trend might be wrong? I recently made a video about a growing movement called the Buy Nothing Rebellion, and as I was responding to comments on that video, I realized I was seeing a lot of confusion about no buys and the same comments and criticisms over and over again. So in this video, I wanted to dive into some of the most common myths and misconceptions about the Buy Nothing movement and how understanding it might be the key to breaking free from the toxic cycle of debt and overconsumption that modern society wants to keep us trapped inside by encouraging us to continue buying crap we don't need, which leaves our wallets empty and our homes and lives full of clutter. But first, we need to address problem number one on this list, which is the insane amount of people who think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the economy. On one hand, you have the stock market hitting record highs every single day, and there's people out there who are claiming the economy is fine and everything is sunshine and roses. But on the other hand, I keep hearing more and more people talking about how much they're struggling and reading articles and studies and statistics saying things like 22 states in the US are already in the midst of a recession, that over 50% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and the labor market is so bad that we haven't seen numbers like this since the Great Recession. I got a comment from someone saying that the general manager at the car dealership that he worked at said that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the economy. And this person was asking, where in the world does my boss live? And I jokingly responded to that comment that he lives in denial. But all jokes aside, nowadays it seems like some people are so out of touch. It reminds me of that old movie quote that goes, "The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist." And I think a lot of this disconnect is because we're living in what economists call a K-shaped economy, which means more and more each day we're seeing an economic split between people at different income levels, with high-income households growing their incomes and increasing spending on one hand, versus lower and middle-class folks who are getting more and more pinched by economic hardships like stagnant wages and inflation, which has forced them to cut back on their spending. And I think one of the worst parts about this is that a lot of the people who are trying to convince us there's nothing wrong with the economy are the ones who are laughing all the way to the bank and who stand to profit the most off of our struggles. As a side note, I couldn't help but find it ironic that I was tempted to break my no-buy rules to buy this gorgeous copy of the latest book about the Hunger Games, only to turn it over and see the pages on the side were printed with the words, "Our tears will not be used for their entertainment." So, what do you think? Should I have bought that book? And I think that's one of the reasons that no buys have become so popular, because they're a way for people to take back control when the world feels out of control. But one mistake I see people making all the time when it comes to no buys is falling into a toxic all or nothing mindset and thinking it means not spending money on anything at all. One of the things about these trends and movements is that the more extreme they are, the more attention they tend to get, which is why you see videos talking about buying nothing and no buy rebellion. But the term no buy is somewhat of a misnomer because most people can't stop spending money entirely and still need to buy basic necessities. Which is why when I make these videos, I always get a ton of comments saying things like, no buys are bull, and that buy nothings are impossible, with people sharing their lists of all the things they need to spend money on, such as food, electricity, and transportation. I definitely agree that most people aren't able to just entirely go off the grid and stop spending money. So as a longtime minimalist and frugal living expert, let me assure you that doing a no-buy challenge doesn't mean that you have to completely eliminate all of your spending, and it's up to you to decide how strict you want to be with your no-buy, or if you want to consider it more of a low-buy challenge, and for you to set the guidelines and rules and boundaries about how and what you're going to spend your money on during the entirety of your no-buy, whether it's a week, a month, or as long as a year, or even more. And if you want to see how I do this in more detail, definitely be sure and go check out this video that I'm linking up here, as well as down in the description box below. But the rules that you set for your no buy or low buy will basically depend on the goals that you're trying to achieve. And I've noticed that most of these goals for no buys tend to fall under five main categories. So you have financial goals, which might be something like saving up to buy a house or trying to pay off your car or student loan debt. And then you have people who do no buys and low buys for environmental or ethical reasons, such as trying to reduce the amount of textile waste they're creating by spending less on clothing throughout the year. There are people who do it for psychological or spiritual reasons, such as to heal their relationship with money, or if they struggle with a shopping addiction, or maybe they want to focus less on material possessions and more on their connection with a higher power. I've also seen people do this as a way to try to improve their health and their wellness, such as them coming to the realization that they eat out way too often and they want to cut back on their spending towards fast food and restaurants and learn how to cook healthier meals at home more often. And then finally, more and more people are starting to use no buys as a way to vote with their dollar and stop giving money towards corporations, brands, and influencers that they see as unethical or as contributing to overconsumption.
Speaking of which, I'd love to know your reason or reasons for doing a no buy or low buy. So please drop me a comment down below and share what's motivating you to change your spending habits. And let's take the time to support and cheer each other on.
So, one of the things I did at the beginning of the year was sit down and write a list of 25 things that I was not going to spend money on. And that list included things like the so called rule of five, which was that I was not going to buy any more than five new items of clothing throughout the year. And I also said that I would not be purchasing anything from fast fashion and low quality brands such as Temu and Shein, despite how often they show up in my email inbox and in my messages trying to get me to work with them. And I also committed to doing Project Pan for the entire year and not buying any new skincare, makeup, hair care, or other beauty products unless they should run out. So, again, I think that a lot of the criticism surrounding the buy nothing movement tends to latch onto this idea of not spending money when really not spending money is only a fraction of the problem. And it's really more about people needing to heal their relationship with money and stuff, not only to save money, but also in order to be more intentional and more satisfied with the purchases that they do make. Another common theme I've noticed in these comments is people implying that this should just be easy and effortless and that everyone should just stop shopping, when in reality, just telling someone to stop shopping, especially someone like a shopping addict, isn't much different than telling an alcoholic to just quit drinking or telling someone who is depressed to just smile and be happy. It's not only unhelpful, it's downright dismissive. What we need to keep in mind is that probably every single person who is watching this video right now has been groomed since the day that they were born to be good little consumers. And we have been bombarded with nonstop marketing and ads teaching us that throwing money at stuff is the best way to solve all of our problems. And we've also been conditioned to think that shopping is a fun and harmless way to blow off steam or for us to deal with negative emotions. As someone who has witnessed addictions, both to substances and to stuff, ruin one too many lives in my family in particular, this is why I'm so passionate about making videos on this topic to help people learn how to stop impulse shopping, to help them be more frugal, and to learn how to budget and save money, because a lot of this stuff isn't intuitive. Just because it was normal in your family doesn't mean it was normal in everyone's family. So instead of telling people to just stop shopping, we need to show them how much a behavior change like that can improve their lives and give them the tools, the systems, and the strategies that allow them to do so. Another toxic comment I see popping up all over the place is the people that say that the no buy trend is brainwashing people into restriction and deprivation, and even calling it frugal and minimalist propaganda. But I would argue that the people that think that no buys and saving money and frugality and minimalism are about deprivation and restriction are the ones who have actually been brainwashed into thinking the level of consumption we see nowadays is in any way, shape, or form normal. And the fact is that those of us who are talking about no buys and minimalism and frugal living are closer to what used to be considered normal, but nowadays is a very, very unpopular minority. And to illustrate this, I actually want to grab my computer and pull up some data that I found that I think is going to blow your mind about this. I have a tool called TubeBuddy, which as a YouTuber allows me to look at keywords for a certain word and see how popular it is, how many people are interested in that topic based on, say, how many monthly searches that topic is getting on YouTube. So out of curiosity, when I was making this video, I decided to compare the keyword statistics for topics such as frugal living and buy nothing to the word haul and Shein. So frugal living as a topic gets 105,000 searches per month. And then if we compare that to buy nothing, that only gets 61,000 searches per month. Now, keeping those numbers in mind, let's compare that to the keyword haul, which gets 1.17 million searches per month. Even bigger than just the keyword haul, the keyword Shein gets 53 million searches per month. So based on that data, the conclusion that we can come to here is that there are far more people showing fast fashion hauls and trying to sell you low quality clothes and products than there are talking about saving money and frugal living. So in my opinion, this is a clear indicator that we as a society need to rewire our brains to move away from getting our dopamine hits and satisfaction from material possessions. And I actually plan on diving into this topic in more detail in next week's video. So if you're not already subscribed, be sure and go down and hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to turn on all notifications so that you don't miss that video when it comes out. The next one I find kind of funny because on one hand, there are people who think that no buy equals broke people, boring people, or we are the failures of society. And then on the other hand, you have people saying that it's only for rich white people. I even got one comment from someone who wrote me practically an entire novel, calling me ungrateful and implying that we'd never gone through tough times in our entire life, which is pretty wild considering my husband grew up in third world poverty and didn't even have electricity, running water, or toilets in his childhood home. And I've also gone through almost everything that that person mentioned, from losing my parents and my childhood home in my early 20s, to surviving everything from DV and house fires, to having to crawl around on my hands and knees for 3 weeks after an injury because I didn't have health insurance or the money to pay for an emergency room visit at the time. Which I hope is a good reminder that you can't tell everything about someone just by looking at them. But I want to assure you that no buys are for everyone, no matter your age, race, or gender. And there's a quote that I love from Ramit Sethi that goes, "You can simultaneously acknowledge the need for systemic change and acknowledge that we can take personal responsibility for the things we can change." And I think that no buys are a great way to challenge yourself to be the kind of change that you want to see in the world. The sixth myth I want to address in this video is that women are the ones who are responsible for destroying the world. I've noticed that whenever I make videos about no buys or I talk about saving money or frugal living, there are always men who come out of the woodwork to tell me that all women are terrible with money and that we're the ones who are responsible for bankrupting our families and ruining the planet. But when I saw comments about this, instead of getting angry and defensive, I decided to get curious. And when I did a deep dive into this topic, I found some articles and studies that found that men are actually a bigger source of pollution than women, and that men's spending has led to 16% more climate heating emissions compared to women, even the ones who had similar spending levels. And they also found that women are more likely than men to recycle and make eco-friendly changes in their lives. But on the other hand, there are certain areas where women could definitely do better, because women account for up to 80% of consumer spending and tend to spend more on personal care products and clothes, whereas men spend on things like cars and vices like tobacco and alcohol. And interestingly, I also recently happened upon a video feature about ThreadUp that Business Insider made a few months back. And in that video, I was surprised to hear that ThreadUp only caters to women and kids because men don't buy clothes as often and tend to wear them until they are worn out. But in the end, finger pointing and blaming the opposite gender is never helpful. And I think we as a society would do well to start asking questions like, why don't men recycle as often as women? And what can we do as women to reduce the amount of textile waste we're producing? One step I took to reduce textile waste in my own life this year was to implement the Rule of Five, which is based on a 2022 report by an environmental institute that found everyone in the world needs to reduce their annual fashion consumption to that figure for the industry to meet its climate and greenhouse gas emissions goals. And I will be sure to link to that report down in the description box below for you in case you're interested in reading about their results yourself. And finally, the last misconception I want to touch on is whether or not it's okay for people to buy gifts or celebrate things like holidays during their no buy or low buy. A lot of people think the answer is automatically no, but the correct response is it depends. Remember, the rules you set for your no buy should always depend on your values and the goals you're setting for yourself and your family, which is like your own personal North Star guiding you towards a better future. If celebrating a holiday or giving a thoughtful gift aligns with your North Star, then it's not breaking your challenge to do that. In my opinion, a no buy shouldn't be about punishment or cutting out joy, connection, or the traditions that make our lives meaningful, as long as the purchases that we make are in our budget and we're being mindful and intentional about them. If you're looking for guidelines, one popular rule for gift giving in the frugal living and minimalism community is called the 4-gift rule, which is the idea that you give them something they want, something they need, something to wear, and something to read. And if you want to find out more about no buys or the things that I do and do not spend money on as a minimalist, be sure and go check out one of these videos that YouTube thinks that you like, or I'll see you next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.